we have to go back to the original idea of at the time it was called the Europe 92 project. And at the time you had very strong political leaders. You had Mitterrand on the left, you had Thatcher on the right, you had Helmut Kohl somewhere in between. And they came together and decided to create this free flow of people and capital and free flow of goods within the European Union. That was the initial project, to basically create a free market and get rid of all the borders and the tariffs within the European Union. And that was the real project. And there was a lot of optimism at the time because that created a lot of business opportunities. What has happened since then, and I'm come back to what I said before, is that the bureaucrats in Brussels have hijacked the whole project.
I'm your host, Melanie Schaefer. Welcome to Lead Leg Live. Now, Europe is facing a moment of real geopolitical pressure. The war in Ukraine continues to reshape the continent's security architecture, and new tensions in the Middle East are adding another layer of uncertainty for global markets and the energy policy. According to Reuters, European officials have warned that escalating conflicts could further strain an already fragile geopolitical environment for the region. And against that backdrop, there is a growing debate about whether Europe's political and economic model is still capable of responding to the challenges that it faces. To talk about that and the investment landscape, today is Hervé van Caloen, president of Mercator Investment Management. Hervé, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Melanie. Glad to be here.
So, Hervé, you said that if we want to improve a situation, defining the problem is, of course, half of the solution. When you look at Europe today, economically and politically, what do you define as the core problem?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Europe is waking up to the new reality. I think for a long time, Europe had kind of ignored what was going on in the world, and somehow we're very complacent. Europe was... the European Union really was run by this understanding that France would handle the military and geopolitics of the European Union, and Germany handles the finance and the economy. That whole concept has been shattered with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Obviously, Russia and Putin was not deterred by the French military. And the German economy over the last 5 years has been totally stagnant. So now Europe has to kind of rethink its future. And I think with the pressure coming from America, there's definitely a lot of changes going on. I think for the better as Europe becomes more realistic.
Speaking about the pressures from the U.S., what are you seeing in terms of, for decades, the European project was sort of anchored by French-German leadership. We saw Trump sitting in the White House the other day with the German chancellor, and at the same time making negative remarks about Spain and France. Do you agree that the model has effectively broken down? And what do you think happens to that partnership?
Yes, and when something that doesn't work breaks down, that's probably a good thing. And now we have to kind of rebuild, and everything has to be rebuilt the way I see it. Has to come from Germany. Germany is the only country that can actually save the whole European Union project. And you're seeing that with Chancellor Merz now deciding to become the largest military in Europe by 2029. So Germany has decided to no longer be just a soft power, but to become a real military power and to be part of the debate in the geopolitics. And they're investing very heavily into their military, which has a lot of consequence, not just in geopolitics, but the fact that Germany will take the lead now in Europe, and which is a concept that's very difficult, or the whole concept of the European Union is very difficult to manage because you have 27 members and, somebody has to make a decision here. And if you don't have a leadership coming from Germany, very little happens. And we've seen that in recent past, and, where the European Union bureaucrats in Brussels or the European Commission or the European Parliament are all trying to get more power. So you have this tug of war between the European bureaucrats and the different countries that really matter. And I think Germany now is determined to kind of change the dynamics. Let's see if we can achieve that.
Do you think for Germany to do that, is the U.S. backing important? Is that the most important thing?
I think Germany realizes that, Europe can no longer count on the American military umbrella forever, and never should have. I mean, at a certain point, they have to be able to defend themselves. So what is happening is that Germany is investing, and Germany has the means to invest heavily in the military, in their defense structure. So we have a budget that it's hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild or to actually build a military, because Germany didn't have a real military force. And that has a lot of consequences for the technology as well, because, you don't just invest in guns and tanks anymore. A military has to be technology advanced. And so you invest in drones and satellites and cybersecurity and missiles. And that will kind of create a revival of the German technology that we're already seeing with a lot of investments in these technology companies.
Is there going to be kickback then from the other European countries in the region?
I think, of course, there's going to be a debate, and we'll see where that is going. Very interestingly, Chancellor Merz has tried to start a new idea of having a two-tier European Union, where the six largest countries would move forward and not wait for everybody else to come on board when they make decisions, and then eventually the rest of Europe will follow. So we'll see if that two-tier Europe will work. But that's a starting point. The debate is starting, where Germany is moving forward, trying to create this two-tier economy and two-tier political union. And the rest of Europe will have to follow if they want it to work. I think we are still in that process. And for this to happen, I think we will have to see the European Union in Brussels and the bureaucrats and the parliament to kind of give up a little bit of their power, or try to stop taking so much power, because they're bringing too much regulation. That's one of the key issues in Europe. Europe is overregulated because you have so many people making decisions. If you have, like in Belgium, 7 different parliaments in one little country, well, every parliament wants to make decisions. That's what the job is. So you end up with having overregulated economy. And I think the Europeans have started to realize, I think they definitely have realized that they have a problem of overregulation. Now they haven't figured out yet how to reverse that. And that's where we're at now.
Yes, speaking about regulation, Hervé, you've also said Europe needs to become more realistic on several of the policy fronts, particularly energy and also immigration. What changes do you think are necessary there? And what do you think is the timeline for some of these changes taking place?
Yes, and again, we're seeing that in Germany, where they have slowed down the immigration and they have slowed down the transition to zero carbon policies. I think that's realistic. Because if you look at electricity, the cost of electricity in Germany is the highest in the industrial world. It's, I think, like 3 times the cost here in the United States. And that's because they went too fast towards the transition of alternative energies, and which is very expensive compared to what they used to have, like the cheap gas and oil coming from Russia. So Germany is becoming more realistic about their transition towards carbon neutral economy. Also, immigration. The immigration was out of control and was costly and too much. One can debate political issue, and one can be pro or against immigration, but one has to realize that there's a cost involved, because the immigrants in Europe get a lot of social benefits, and they're very costly. So you cannot let people walk in those big numbers and just continue to pay for it. Eventually, that has come under control, and that has happened. We've seen a slowdown of this illegal immigration and also legal immigration in Germany, but all over Europe, because there's been a pushback as well from the voters.
Yeah, and so going back to what you brought up 2 questions ago, I think you've also said that Europe needs to go back to the formation it was in the early 1990s and focus more on free markets, and less on, as you said, centralized decision making. What should that look like in actual practice?
So we have to go back to the original idea of at the time it was called the Europe 92 project. And at the time you had very strong political leaders. You had Mitterrand on the left, you had Thatcher on the right, you had Helmut Kohl somewhere in between. And they came together and decided to create this free flow of people and capital and free flow of goods within the European Union. That was the initial projects to basically create a free market and get rid of all the borders and the tires within the European Union. And that was the real project. And there was a lot of optimism at the time because that created a lot of business opportunities. What has happened since then, and I've come back to what I said before, is that the bureaucrats in Brussels have hijacked the whole project. And I think partly because the political leadership in the different countries was so weak, so that the European Union in Brussels, the Commission, just took much more power, and the Parliament is trying to get involved. And so it's the whole project of just creating a free market of Europe has been hijacked by bureaucrats who are trying to make it a political union. And instead of deregulation that should have come with the free markets of the 1992 project, we've had much more regulation. That's the exact opposite that has happened. So again, it's this tug of war between the politicians at the national level and politicians and the bureaucrats because they're not elected at the European level.
And so, and then Hervé, to bring that into to talk about investments and trading, where do you think the environmental and economic shifts that we're discussing are going to come into play? Where are the opportunities going to be?
So I think the opportunities are at this point definitely in the defense sector. I mean, if you look at some companies, the large defense companies in Germany like Rheinmetall, in France like Thales, or in Italy like Leonardo, or in UK the BAE, they've all done very well. And for obvious reasons, their budgets and their sales and their order book have gone through the roof. But, also from there, you're going to see technology benefiting from this. I mean, in Germany, you have a huge budget to invest in the military, but also in the technology that is involved, like satellites and rocket technology. Companies like OHB in Germany, which makes the satellites that Europe has this global navigation system called Galileo. OHB is a company in Germany that built the satellites and is servicing the whole system. Company in France like Lumibird, which is a smaller company, but it's a leader in laser technology, which obviously has a lot of applications in the defense sector. So that's where you see a lot of potential and a lot of excitement. Of course, there are other companies in other sectors, but I think one has to rethink how to invest in Europe as a technology investment, because it has been neglected. Europe has not participated in the AI revolution as much, but they can benefit from that. There's a Dutch company called Nebius, which is a leading neo-cloud company competing with CoreWeave here in the United States. So that there are ways to play the technology in Europe, something that people may probably not realize.
Can you talk a little bit about, you touched on AI and defense, but what about biotech, fashion, even semiconductor equipment? Are there opportunities in those sectors?
It's very interesting you ask that question because, there are some very good biotech companies in Europe, in Belgium especially. They have a lot of small and medium-sized biotech companies. If you look at the semiconductor equipment company, and the Dutch have a really amazing technology. Everybody is familiar with ASML, which is the monopoly globally in the lithography equipment for semiconductors. But there are other companies. They're all kind of offshoots of the former Philips company in Holland. So you have ASM International, ASML, you have BESI, and they all have like very specific technology that is and equipment for the semiconductor industry. So there is a very good technology in countries like the Netherlands, and more now you see investments in startups as well. I mean that's part of what Europe is missing. Europe has lost its desire for risk taking, and I think again to come back to Germany, the Chancellor Merz is investing not just in those large companies to increase, the number of tanks and the number of guns, but the country, the government is actually investing in startups, in rocket technology, rocket ship technology, and things like that. So I think what the Europeans are trying to do is to really ignite the desire for risk taking, and that will take some time. But there is potential because there's very good technology over there.
Hervé, it's always so interesting to talk to you and listen to your ideas on the global economy and policies. Where can people go to find out more, to read your work, and to connect with you?
So my company is called Mercator Investment Management. I have a website, and please maybe you can publish the website here. I'm also on X every day. I'm trying to make some comment on X.com. So please join me there and send me questions, and I would love to start a dialogue with whoever is interested in investing in Europe or in Japan or over the world. We don't invest just in Europe. This is the topic today, but there's a lot going on in Japan as well.
Exactly. And I urge people to go back and look at the last podcast we did where you talked more about Japan and even South America. I think we'll put the link in the description below. But Hervé, thank you again so much for being here. And thanks to everyone for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more episodes of Lead Lag Live.
Thank you very much, Melanie.